Hi, I'm Lex of Autonomous Research. We're a global research firm focused on financial services across the financial technology stack, from banks to asset management to insurance. And I focus specifically on emerging technologies that, if you back solve from the future to now, completely change how financial services work. And so blockchain is extremely important to what that industry looks like going forward. So let's talk about initial coin offerings. Just for some context, initial coin offerings have been exploding in 2017 in both the good way and the bad way. Prior to 2017, we've had a lot of crypto activity. Bitcoin itself, the paper behind Bitcoin, was written in 2008. So there's a long time horizon of developments in this space. But the funding has shifted massively from private funding to public funding. And here's what I mean by that. The first money that flowed into the space went into operating companies from venture capital funds. And so that was to fund Bitcoin wallets, Bitcoin exchanges, and other foundational crypto infrastructure. After that, you had lots of corporations realize that blockchain, the technology under Bitcoin, could help them save money and be more efficient. And so the next wave was corporate venture going behind enterprise blockchain. Hyperledger, R3, Digital Asset Holdings, Enterprise Ethereum Alliance are all symptoms of this. And then we had the most recent wave. In 2017, we're looking at more than 4 billion in initial coin offerings. That is an order of magnitude, perhaps 10 times the size of all the other venture and corporate venture funding into the space. 100 crypto funds, more than 100 crypto funds have been created in this year just to take advantage of this opportunity. So what is the opportunity? What is an initial coin offering? The concept of an initial coin offering sits somewhere between crowdfunding on the one hand and venture funding on the other hand. And so what you're investing in is not necessarily a security in the traditional sense. You're not really buying a piece of an operating company and owning some sort of claim on the cash flows or the assets of that company. You can create a token that mirrors that, but most tokens are not designed as equity pieces of the operating company itself. Most tokens and ICOs are designed as utility tokens. And so you can think of those as the money supply within a particular organization for a project to work. So some sort of internal currency that represents an asset, a piece of human attention, a share of cloud computing, a share of media, something that is used within the network in order to make an open source software network function. So you're buying ahead of time, in most of these cases, you're buying a piece of that future functionality and actually monetizing it upfront. This is pretty revolutionary because you can tokenize very many things, and certainly some people think that we're over-tokenizing or creating too many ICOs that perhaps don't have a product market fit. Regardless, 2018 will be a test year for initial coin offerings because the regulators have moved from careful observance of innovation to now really trying to take the laws of the jurisdiction, whether that is security law or money transmitter law or banking licenses, and put the crypto economy companies through that filter. And so you'll see a lot of that getting cleared out in 2018. All the while, the traditional financial firms put assets into the space looking for alpha. So a very dynamic year, and excited to see what happens. Thanks again. If you want to check out more, see next.autonomous.com or check us out on Twitter at AutonoFintech or at Lex Oakland. Thanks.
Woody Benson is the partner at Launch Capital Partners. He's tonight's moderator. He's considered a business partner and company builder by his CEOs. Half of his career has been on the operational side and the other half on the investing side. He's an executive in residence at Bentley and hosts a weekly radio show on Bloomberg on alternative investing with a focus on venture capital. And now, Woody, it's your turn.
All right, thank you very much. Let me first introduce our illustrious panel, and if I go fast, it's because I go fast. Chris Catalini is the Theodore Miller Career Development Professor at MIT and Assistant Professor in Technological Innovation, Entrepreneurship, Strategic Management at the MIT School of Management. Chris is one of the principal investigators of the MIT Digital Currency Research Study, which gave access to all MIT graduate students to Bitcoin in the fall of 2014. He is also part of the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy and recently launched the Digital Currency Initiative. He holds a PhD from Rodman School of Management, University of Toronto, and an MSc in Economics and Management of New Technologies from Boccini University in Milan. Your parents must be so disappointed. Next is Kavita Gupta, who's a founding partner at Consensus. I think you'll all learn a lot tonight and part of the ICO structure where Consensus fits in. She's the recipient of the UN Social Finance Innovator Award in 2015 for being an integral part of the founding Green Bond team at the World Bank. At Consensus, she heads a unique VC hedge fund. It's important because I'm trying to figure out if I'm going to have a job at the end of this panel. Investing in next-generation blockchain technologies, revolutionizing our current system. She founded and headed World Bank's first innovation fund in 2010. She's on the board and advisor of various accelerators and foundations across the world, like the Google Accelerator Social Track, MIT Solve, Vatican's Right Now Foundation for Impact Investments, Mandela Foundation, and she's an MIT and Media Lab alum. Welcome. Well, David's a lot younger, so this will be shorter. David's the co-founder at SIA, powered by Nebulous. He's been active in the Bitcoin space since 2011. He studied computer science at Rensselaer Polytech and co-founded Nebulous in 2014 during his senior year. Based in Boston, David and his team have spent the last 3 years building SIA, a decentralized cloud storage network. And what I just learned, David, who's originally from Chicago, met one of Boston's very best capitalists, Jimmy Pilata, who, upon meeting David, wouldn't let him return to Chicago and set him up, and David's still here in Boston. So that's a great tribute, and welcome, David. Next is Chet, and Chet's the founder of fintech startup Tengu. Tengu is transforming the finance industry using blockchain technology. He also serves as the global entrepreneur in residence at UMass Boston, UMass VDC Entrepreneurship Ambassador, and the president of the Boston chapter of the Government Blockchain Association. And who knew that existed? Chet obtained his electronics engineering degree from BIT Bangalore, where he served as the president of the student body. Post-graduation, he worked at Microsoft at various software development and business development roles. Welcome, Chet. And lastly, and certainly not least, is David Codney, who's a board member at Cross River Bank. He's a former Massachusetts Commissioner of Banks. As a board member at Cross River Bank, he has a focus on guiding the bank's regulatory compliance framework. David most recently served as the Commissioner of Banks for the Mass Division of Banks, where he's responsible for the supervision of nearly 200 state-chartered banks and credit unions holding combined assets of over $400 billion. Welcome, David. So certainly an illustrious obviously, they ran out of budget when it got time for the moderator. But I just wanted to show a simple thing in my pocket. Nothing got my hands on it. It's a basic, winnings from a casino. No, it's a basic $100 bill, and it says on this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. And that's brought to you by a government that's $40 trillion in debt. Let that just sit with you. as we go through tonight's proceedings. And tonight we really want to get into ICOs, which is the monetization of these companies, and not so much deep into crypto or blockchain, although we'll touch on those. So any of these, any of our panelists can jump on this, and I think everyone knows, and the last time we had a bubble period, the 90s, there was this notion of the four horsemen. And the four horsemen were the four banks that took they took my company public, two of them in the 90s. My question is, who are the four horsemen today? Consensus. So with that, it's kind of a trick question a little bit because the four horsemen were bankers, and it was Tommy Wiseau and Robertson Stevenson, Montgomery, and they took, because back then when you went to go public, you basically got a banker, because you sell your stock to the bank, then you had an accountant and lawyer, and that was it. But today's environment is a little bit more complicated. So Kavita, please tell us about what Consensus does in this world of ICOs.
I'll take the rest of your panel if I start talking about what Consensus does. Consensus started as a technology company along with a venture studio to incubate lots of different ideas and projects on Ethereum blockchain. And over the last 2 years, it has become a big, a horseman probably I would say, with like a lot of branches. We have Consensus Enterprise, which works with a lot of companies like Microsoft to help them build up Ethereum blockchain products. Then we have Consensus Academy, which is teaching and training the current existing engineers onto how to code on blockchain. Then we have Ethereum Alliance, which you already talked about, which was initiated by Consensus, but it's a non-profit foundation. I think we also have Consensus Incubation Program, where we have more than 48 spokes internally, working anywhere from decentralized exchange to financial predictive markets to identity platform to music decentralization system. And then it comes to Consensus Capital, which has an asset management service. It has a token foundry where we launch a lot of tokens for external companies contributing to the ICOs.
And how specifically does Consensus work with ICO companies or companies trying to go through the ICO process?
So Token Foundry, which is led by Harrison Hines, they actually look at the company and based on their diligence decide if this is a project they want to take. And once they do, they help from designing the tokens to security contracts to actually launching it, marketing around it, helping companies to raise pre-ICO and post-ICO raise and everything. So it's the whole process.
One last question here. In a part of the ICO process, the company is required to produce a white paper. And the white paper, I don't want to say it's a prospectus because that would be wrong, but the white paper is generally a technical description of the company and how they use blockchain, the team, and how the token's going to work and essentially participate in the economy. Can you comment on what you do around white papers and how challenging it is for ICO companies to produce a effective white paper for investors?
Yeah, so I think if the company only has a deep technology vision, we actually sit down with them and understand what's the business side of it. How's the token actually, what is the utility of this utility token? What should be the design? And help them go through and fix the gaps if we really feel the project is that incredible we want to be part of. And over time, I think it's more than a white paper nowadays. Along with the white paper, we help them create a whole pitch deck. We also help them create how the financial proceeds going to go and then map back and say, hey, based on this, you actually don't need $100 million. You probably just need $5 million by the time you come and be revenue driven. So I think combination of all that stuff, we help the whole thinking process from business, financials, and technology and put it together.
Okay, super secret trick question. How many crypto investors are there in the world?
No idea.
Okay, David, we're going to come. See, here's a guy who knows how to raise money. He just makes up the number. So David at SIA is a real Boston proud case. David, tell us about the company and your ICO and how you think about it in the process, and try to kind of educate the audience at the same time on the process of the ICO.
First, is my mic on? Is it working?
You need to turn your mic on.
Is that better?
Yes.
A little bit better. All right, I'll just speak loud. The question was?
The question was, David, please tell us about SIA, your story, and your journey through the ICO process with a focus on educating the audience about the ICO system.
Yeah, so we got started in 2014. We did one of the earliest ICOs, and we raised a mind-boggling $100,000. And then from there, that gave us, I guess, a proof story or like traction. So we went to traditional venture capital and raised an additional 375. And then we basically shut all the windows and got to coding. And we went underground for probably 2 years. We launched our first blockchain. I should probably say what the blockchain did. So it's a decentralized cloud storage platform that we launched in June of 2015. Our goal was to create a cloud platform where you could put your data into the cloud without having to trust a cloud provider. Much the same way that Bitcoin allows you to have currency without needing to depend on either a bank or some centralized system. And so that's what we've done. We have a platform today that we've been slowly building, expanding, improving stability and scale, that you can today go download our software, get started on the blockchain, make some contracts, and then you can start uploading and downloading files and using it as a cloud storage system that has no central player. One of the things we're most proud about is that if our company were to disappear tomorrow, all of our users today would not notice any interruption to service or any degradation of service. We don't run any hosts ourselves, and we don't play any core role on the network other than releasing the software and convincing people to upgrade. So we're very proud of the autonomy that our software has to date, and we hope to bring it to a point where it starts to threaten Amazon and Google and EMC.
And so you already had your ICO, and your ICO must be on how many exchanges?
So actually, the token that we ICO'd in 2014 is not on any exchanges today. We have two separate assets on our blockchain. The first is the SIA coin, which is what most people would recognize as a utility token. It's what you use to pay for storage on the network. And the SIA coin was created much in the same way of Bitcoin. There was no pre-mine or token sale or anything like that. Just one day people started mining, and then every time a block was found, there was some new currency introduced, and then that sort of propagated it into the system.
So when you need capital, do you raise capital through a SAFT?
So we have a second asset that we created when the asset existed in June 2015 when we launched the blockchain, and it is a revenue-based asset called the SIA Fund. And basically, every time someone makes a file contract on our network, 3.9% of the money in that contract gets taken as a fee and distributed to all the owners of SIA funds. And so that means that the SIA fund holders have this revenue stream based on the amount of usage that the SIA platform has. So when we go to raise revenue, we will be selling more of our SIA fund holdings.
And this is all dictated in your contracts?
This is all on the blockchain. It's all part of the consensus rules. It's still fully decentralized.
Right. Be careful, David. Here comes the softball.
All right.
How are you different from storage and Filecoin?
I like to present ourselves as the only decentralized cloud storage platform in the world at the moment. I don't think any of our competitors can claim that they have a platform where if they were to disappear tomorrow, their platform would still be fully operational. But we can say that, and so I think that alone is a big enough distinguisher for 2017.
Okay, so now a little bit more conceptual. What are the deep components of blockchain that haven't yet been solved? And how many smaller projects depend on protocol layer technology that hasn't been tested or even in some cases developed?
So in terms of blockchain challenges as a whole, I think the one on everybody's mind is scalability. Bitcoin sort of ran up against the scalability wall, and we're trying to figure out how we can get from 1 to 10 million people, and then of course 10 million people is still not very many, and how maybe we can get from 10 to a billion. And I think that this is a open problem. I don't think anyone has a very good solution. I have some solutions that I'm partial to, but that have not been accepted widely yet as viable solutions. And I don't think there's any solution out there where you could see multiple experts agreeing that's possibly a viable way to do it. In terms of technologies that haven't been given a fair shot, I think decentralized prediction markets. I know there are a couple out there. I'm not super thrilled with any of them, but I think that is, I don't think anybody's gotten the equation right yet, but I think that once you do, that's going to be a very big part of our economy in the future.
All right, last question. On a scale of 1 to 10, how hard is it to find a blockchain engineer?
10.
Okay, we're gonna come back. Would you rather get like an NLP AI guy or a blockchain guy? Which is tougher?
I'd rather have a blockchain guy.
Okay. Chet, please tell us, your journey at Tango and your process through kind of what you aim to accomplish, and where you're at in the ICO process. And I didn't ask David, but I'll ask you, and what service provider for Horseman have you surrounded yourself with? Development shop / VC like Consensus, or an offshore development, or a PR, or a Telegram community manager, or an accountant, or a lawyer, or a seller, or whatever.
Oh, it's a lot of questions.
Do you want me to repeat the question?
I'll try to remember. So at the core of it at Tango, what we're trying to do is I'm not sure many of you remember a movie that came out in the 90s called The Net. Sandra Bullock was an actor in that, where someone just goes and erases her entire identity and nobody knows who she is, and she has to reestablish who she is. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with what happened in June, I think, when Equifax got hacked and most of your data is stolen. So what we're trying to do is to put your credit scoring and your identity on the blockchain. What we believe is the sum total of who you are in the digital world is your identity. And to some extent, like if you go back in the history, people say your reputation precedes you, but that means that your reputation is your identity. So that's sort of what we're working on, and to sort of having your credit score on the blockchain gives a lot of things leverage.
People don't trust Equifax anymore?
Oh, no, they completely trust them. They went back and paid them another couple of dollars to lock them.
And where are you at in the process?
So most of the last year and a half was on the research side, trying to figure out exactly what we wanted to do. And so we've now started engineering the blockchain itself, and hopefully we'll have the network launched in next 2018. We haven't thought about ICO from the traditional sense. Like David mentioned, there is two sort of coins. One is for circulation for usage of storage. The other one is sort of like an investment vehicle. In our case, what we're thinking about is that we would launch the network in a traditional sense. People start putting their data on the blockchain, and they start earning coins, which they can use for storing on for miners to protect their information. But we're also looking at the ICO from a perspective of focusing on one use case. For example, we're thinking about how can we do student debt refinance. So if, for example, all of us can say, okay, we have extra money, we're going to lend money to the blockchain, and someone can borrow money from the blockchain. But how do you do that? By being able to trust that
It's almost like your investors would put up the asset to refinance the debt.
Yes, not to finance the company itself.
No, to refinance the student debt.
Student debt, yes.
Message from the fire department, everyone standing up, please come and, well, take the front row seats. No, please come and, if you're standing up. David.
Yes.
No.
Other David.
Other David. David, I know you're not with the SEC, and I know you're not a regulator, but you're, and no one's really listening, but we really want to know, like, are we just going to blow ourselves up to bits here? Like, are we, like, the CEO of Consensus, Mr. Gorman, said this week in Germany, I believe, he said, the question was, are we in a bubble? He said, yeah, we're in a bubble, but it's a good bubble. So where are we? And if you're to kind of guess, where are, the regulators, in this?
Well, I would say, first of all, we've come a long way. So I first got exposed to Bitcoin back in 2013 when we started as regulators, started talking about this new thing that we were hearing about. And of course, Silk Road broke at the time. And then, lo and behold, I was asked to testify before the United States Senate on the risks and benefits of Bitcoin. So it was a crash course for me. And so within 24 hours, there was a hearing at the Homeland Security Committee, and then next I testified before the Banking Committee. And I remarked to people that within 24 hours of my testimony, the price of Bitcoin went from about $10 up to $100. So had I only been so smart to invest at the time, given today's prices, but no, we've come a long way in price, but we've also come a long way as regulators. The types of questions, and from a government perspective, certainly at the time, that hearing, I was getting questions like, should we be thinking about banning Bitcoin? Because this is, we have no control over it. It could interfere with the money supply.
Could you ban Bitcoin? I mean, could that actually happen?
No, of course not.
Right.
I mean, that's the thing. It's like, go back, to the mid-90s. There were people who were saying, we should ban the internet because it's dangerous. Well, this is not where government should be. Government can't, ban or regulate the internet. Government can't ban or regulate Bitcoin.
This market reacts, based upon what the SEC guy, said after lunch walking towards his car. So it's like when Don Imus would interview what's-her-name about, what Greenspan had for breakfast, it would move a market.
But what government needs to concern itself with is not the technology, it's the activity. So, for example, again, early on, as a banking regulator, we were confronted with this issue about do we regulate Bitcoin? And then there were companies that were in these markets, exchanges or money transmission, and who said, we're not transmitting currency, so don't, it doesn't apply to us. And then there was this evolution where companies realized that in order to, have wider acceptance and certainty, they needed some form of government regulation, sort of the good housekeeping seal of approval. So you had a lot of responsible companies coming to us and saying, how can we create a framework, some rules of the road that we all can live by? And I think that we're in a similar position here in the world of ICOs.
Well, let me ask you a question, because I think about this. When on these ICOs, the money that's generated for the company is taxable, right? Because you're essentially selling a token for future use, and it's treated as ordinary revenue at the highest tax rate. Do you think somewhere the government's like, whoa, maybe there's a quid pro quo here, in that we're getting so much money into the Treasury, that the SEC could, or or do they not talk at all?
You're giving way too much credit to government officials.
What are you kidding me? I read the tweets every day. Oh no.
Yeah, yeah. No.
All right. So maybe they don't talk. But let me ask you this. I think that this is central to the ICO process. Is a lot of these token sales are through SAFs, which is a sale of future tokens, which companies sell to individuals or funds or investors. And what you probably don't know, or maybe some of you do know, is that a lot of those SAFT agreements come with discounts and terms, right? Like it's possible that the early investor in an ICO can dictate their own terms, right? And this, doesn't really happen in the IPO land, so much. So can you comment a little bit on these SAFT agreements and whether they're securities or not securities, and that fine line between utility tokens and security tokens?
I can't really. What I can say is that you've got this world of uncertainty right now, and in some ways it's because this is all still evolving, and we should be thankful that we're not government and regulators are not jumping in early, because usually when they do, if they try to set some rules of the road at the outset, they don't know what they're doing, and it has some very bad unintended consequences. So the good news is that we're learning. The bad news is that we're getting a lot of conflict and uncertainty. So you've got the IRS, which says that this is a taxable event, asset. You've got the the CFTC in the U.S. that is saying that this is a commodity. You've got the SEC that's talking about these events, on a case-by-case basis that it could trigger the securities laws. Then you've got state regulators, both on the security side, on the banking side. So there's a lot of there's a real lack of clarity. So at some point we need to start coalescing, and that's going to require industry. And the players, working with the regulators, working with government officials to say, okay, let's start creating some rules of the road that we can all live by, that does protect consumers or investors, but it doesn't create this Wild West.
Was the senator from Alabama in the room? Okay. Chris, first tell us about the research project you're doing at MIT.
So I started, most of my previous research was focused on crowdfunding and equity crowdfunding. So similar issues just a few years ago to the ones that we're discussing with ICO. Then in 2013, I got involved with the 2 students at MIT that had raised $500,000 to give everybody $100 in Bitcoin at a time. The majority of which, by the way, the MIT students are still holding. So wise decision on their side. And from there, I got more and more interested in blockchain and kind of the more recent developments. Then we started tracking a number of these ICOs projects, mostly because they look familiar, given the work that I had done on crowdfunding. And so we started collecting more data on them. And then we stumbled actually on someone that I think it's in the room, Galen, from Token Report. So a shout out to Galen. There he is. And we decided to kind of join forces on some of this research and build a kind of a comprehensive overview of the space. I think our goal is to separate, there's excitement, so there's, I think, a technological opportunity out there. Everybody's trying to figure out what are going to be the next unicorns that are come out of this. But there's also some fraud and scam and some wannabes coming in because of the opportunity itself. And how much is each share?
So help me understand this. If you were a public company investor, you would get a prospectus and they were filled with media information like revenue, cost of sales, margin, governance, risk factors, capital, all this. Present a picture for the audience, what a thorough research product would look like for the investors in crypto. Kind of just your wildest idea of the things that are important. I mean, I can think of things. Some things that are important, like you never had these explosion in chat rooms, or number of exchanges, but help us, visualize what a next generation, dashboard would look like for investors.
So first of all, these are highly speculative assets. So, to anybody in the room, I would not put anything on any of these tokens that you cannot afford to lose today. There's high risk, and they're very early stage. So I think a lot of the tools that we have for evaluating early stage startups apply here. So looking for the team, the skills behind that team. In this case, technology matters, and so looking at how deep their technological background is, can they actually build some of these protocols and infrastructure? In the research we've been doing, we've been tracking some of the online digital trails because they turn to be useful. So the GitHubs, the public, open source collaboration, how active they are, how much engagement is there beyond, just chatter. Turns out that a lot of the opinion forming happens in places like forums and Telegram chats and all of that. It's not always clear how informative it is. A lot of that looks like herding, right? So at some point there's some sort of momentum coming up.
But it's amazing to me, how big some of these, Reddit groups are, and Slack seems to, be born for a different reason. And I've got like 5 companies on Telegram, my phone is blown up. All the time.
You're absolutely right. And I think what's fascinating about this is that society as a whole is trying to cope with uncertainty, in this case technological, but also on the business side. And you see all these different bubbles of activity and speculation with people that are more versus less informed, but still trying to see what is the big opportunity here. And so like in every case, I think some people have realized that as long as you put a blockchain on the title or a token, it's much easier to raise capital. But there's some very serious teams that are really using this, like David and others, for the reason it was designed for.
Can we talk about diligence on investors? So in the old days, when you go public, you would actually do diligence on the investor, what the intent was, how long a lockup would be, what their flipping practice would be, and mostly like where the capital came from. Does this exist in the crypto link? Can you do, any research on, next gen, crypto hedge fund and just showed up on California Street and, how do you as, the person running an ICO figure that out?
I think it's extremely challenging. And part of the reason why I think this space hasn't unlocked its true potential, it's because there's a lot of immaturity in some of the choices. I'll take one simple example, like vesting. Could you do a fundraise and have a vesting that is like 3 months or 6 months, or even no vesting at all? So the founders are liquid from day one. I think a lot of the basics that we know about early stage investment haven't been ported, if not for the teams that are kind of doing things more properly. And that needs to happen for the space to become safer, but also to allow the good entrepreneurs to thrive and the other ones to not raise capital.
All right, so let's open this up to all the panelists. Is this ICO movement more of a business model change to technology going on the blockchain, or is this a kind of blockchain purist model?
Well, I think you see a lot of both on one end. So I think on the ICO end of the spectrum, most people doing ICOs are more doing it for the new type of capital. I think it's fair to say that ICO capital is a different type of capital than what's traditionally available to new ventures. But I also think that there's a lot of, and the people on the other side of the spectrum tend not to do ICOs, but I think that there are a lot of blockchain purists who either invest in blockchain tokens or work on blockchain tokens because they believe in the core technology more than just as a new type of capital or fundraising.
Building on that, I think the focus has been a lot on funding and raising capital, and I think that's the wrong perspective. Because when you think from a technological perspective, what's fundamentally new here is that if you're trying to build a digital platform or a digital ecosystem, the token gives you an opportunity to take different stakeholders or shareholders at that point and engage them. So it's much more about sharing the returns to network effects with everybody that can contribute to that digital ecosystem.
Someone here is out there is a little bit of a naysayer, but it isn't like we all don't get these questions like all day, every day. Anyone just hop on this if you want to. How does an ICO cryptocurrency differ from a pyramid scheme or the Enron debacle? I know you're thinking it. The way I say it is, I'm sure everyone knows David Watchman, right? I had drinks with David Watchman. It was 10 o'clock. We're in the East Village, and I was on my 4th Manhattan, and I, right at that moment, had perfect clarity. Then I woke up. All right, anyone want to?
Well, if you're Jamie Dimon, you think it is a giant pyramid. It's a fraud. It's at the same time that his bank is one of the leading investors in Bitcoin and blockchain technology. So I don't want to accuse him of manipulation or anything, but it's a little ironic that this guy makes a statement like that.
But go ahead and tackle this. How does an ICO differ from a pyramid scheme or the Enron debacle?
I think in a lot of ways when people invest in ICO, first of all, it's a choice, right? Secondly, the whole concept started that instead of 5 people sitting in a VC office, you have everybody actually doing diligence on the white paper, figuring out the business. And if that is convincing enough, then you actually invest in that company. So the ethos of it started from whether you want to invest in a company in a crowdsourced manner or not. Now, of course, there is a lot of FOMO which kicked in over time. There was a lot of following up which kicked in over time. But I think the way the market is adjusting itself, it is going back to slowly, it's going back to the basic principle. You have a white paper. Hopefully, like some of the companies we are looking now are also adding the business plan, how the proceeds are going to go, what are going to be the next milestones, and based on that, you can decide if you want to invest in or not.
I think there's a combination of both. In the sense, there are some pyramid schemes, there are scams. There is a coin called Ponzi coin. It's live. So, and Enron is the reason why IPOs became very hard and difficult for companies to IPO. But this doesn't mean that all of them are scams. Doesn't mean all the teams are working on. There are really good teams, legitimate projects that are trying to make some really useful products for the world. But I wouldn't say all of them are scams.
I know that in the case of Bitcoin allows you to do things that you cannot do with any other medium or any other financial tool. Namely, when you have Bitcoin, you have this security around the properties of the system. You know that nobody can come and take it from you. You know that you can send it without anyone's permission. And you know that it's like international. In 10 minutes you can buy a T-shirt from Dubai, and like there's no portal or centralized company that you have to get involved with, or there's no credit card to freeze, and so at the very least that distinguishes it strongly from a Ponzi scheme because it has this inherent utility that isn't available anywhere else.
So I have a personal question. I'm a venture capitalist. Am I going to have a job in 5 years?
It's going to be difficult.
That's because I said no to your last deal, right, Chad? That's payback? Okay, all right.
Because venture capital is going away.
Can you
Okay.
change, adopt, and learn?
I have to adopt it. Oh, man. I was just thinking how blessed we're all here to be here and have something new to talk about. Okay, so was thinking about this today, and I got this question. Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, and banks won't take this lying down. So I was thinking about this today. Like, what if, you're a big public company and you see, I'll give you an example. You see, let's say you're a big public, there's one of the highest value ICOs, a company called IOTA, right? Valued at 2.7 billion, thingamabarbers, right? And it's gaining momentum because it's gaining momentum, for decentralized tokens and network utility. How does, an Amazon, Google, Facebook, Microsoft, or SAP then go and participate in that? Do they, well, I have an idea what they do, and it isn't they pay cash, but how do the big guys, play in this? Or what do you all see?
I think the challenge is that often for an incumbent, you have to rethink the business model. And so when you tokenize an existing business, you're changing how you create value in the ecosystem and how you capture value. Linking it back to your question about will there be a job, I think the way VCs create value today, it's still going to be there, right? The mentorship, the selection, the screening, all of those can be done on a token. Some parts of what you do will be commodified, and so part of the revenue stream will change and become more competitive. But I think this applies to many of the businesses we see in this space.
We're also seeing a lot of big companies, I can't specifically take the names, creating a joint ventures with blockchain technologies. So they are creating very parallel, they're licensing their own technology, which has been 8 years, 10 years in practice, have like million and billion of users, and then licensing that to the middle platform and putting blockchain into it and then creating tokens on it. So there are like a lot of innovative structuring which is coming out, which is only giving us a very good idea that this is the direction, this is the way they are experimenting and understanding, and it's going to be adopted in a big way.
So, I heard yesterday that Cisco is starting a blockchain group. Like, which do you think would be more successful? Cisco taking, 10 or 15 of their engineers and putting them through, blockchain basic training, or going and buying a blockchain company?
I think combination of two, at least that's what I feel. There is going to be a lot of, definitely there's going to be a big acquisitions of a lot of blockchain companies which are coming
How will they
out.
pay for that?
We'll take whatever they give, Ether, Bitcoin, cash, tokens. I think...
David, how are they going to pay for that? If Cisco wants to go lay out 3 big ones because they can't figure out how to, train their guys in blockchain, how do they pay for that?
Which David was that directed
You.
to? Well,
He's a revenue share guy.
We can talk all we want about, the value of Bitcoin or, of ICOs, but at the end of the day, there's still some mammoth, mega players out there. They're, on the tech side, on the banking side, and, there may be, I'm sure there's a lot of purists out there who, want to just, disrupt the world, but we still need, banks, we still need some of these traditional players. They're not going away. So do you think if you comb through their international financials deep enough, you would find Bitcoin, ladled in 50, offshore accounts? In these companies?
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, good.
But I think I also want to add, big players, the big institutional investors like SoftBank, they are getting into cryptocurrency. And then when they are holding Ethers and Bitcoins and actually creating exchanges across the world, investing in Uber, they can invest in any way possible.
My next trick question, how many exchanges are there in the world?
How are they doing, or how?
How many?
Oh, how many? David, answer.
I gave him the answer before.
Before I heard the answer, I said several per country.
Okay, sure you did. Okay, there's over 100 exchanges. Just in defense of venture capital, I work for a family office, so it's not like a fund with agreements with limited partners. But you can bet, like every venture capitalist is going back to their LPs and restructuring their agreements for crypto. So given that's the case, and you'll invest some crypto and you get crypto back, what's everyone's feeling about getting liquidity from there? Chris?
I think it relates to a broader issue of governance. So one of the major challenges, especially on the permissionless side, which is, for it to be extremely innovative and keep advancing, it needs good governance. And that relates also to the ownership, to what happens when there's conflict. And we haven't seen that yet. I think it's developing, but it's kind of the biggest challenge into how the systems will evolve.
So, what is the deal on governance? Like, David, you have you're a public company, so to speak, right?
Yeah. So
Do you have any governance? Do you have any reporting? Is there a board of directors like approving your business plan, your spending, ethical behavior? Is there escalation, for fraud?
So as a private company, we do have a board of directors. We do have investors and advisors, and the traditional governance structures you might see at a stage startup. In terms of blockchain, I think that the governance is a lot more interesting. It's really blockchains don't change very easily, and you can do hard forks, but in doing so, you break compatibility and alienate a lot of the ecosystem. But I think that the way you handle that is if there is debate, you can split, and then you end up with Ethereum and Ethereum Classic, or you end up with Bitcoin and Bitcoin Cash. And while that doesn't speak much to what holds the founders accountable, I think it does sort of show what happens when you see conflict within a community or within a blockchain about how to handle a certain problem.
I think the governance is also everyone involved in the network. It's the miners, it's the users. Everyone has a vote. Essentially, if the larger community doesn't like what's going on with the founder or the team, they can always, like David said, hard fork. And that itself is sort of a social governance that sort of is inbuilt into the concept of blockchain. There is a very good famous example of one of the early contributors to Ethereum who's famously tried to ban this so-called Twitter competitor. I forget the name of the, which is sort of a more far-right Twitter for free speech. And they were trying to build this whole thing on Ethereum, and he made a lot of sort of negative comments about this. We're never going to allow this on Ethereum, but Vitalik himself came out and said, we're not going to control this. So censorship, in a sense, what I'm trying to say is that if that had happened, they could easily fork it and create their own network. And essentially, the original value of the network is going to go down. So there is some amount of governance that's already inbuilt, but of course, people have to build projects that are inherently driven by those first principles.
I'm going to put my economist hat on just the concept of forking, because forking is expensive. And I think with better governance, you could avoid extreme forks where you're actually destroying value potentially. And so that's probably what's needed in the future.
But these extreme forks are like, stand back or I'm going to shoot myself, right? Because in governance in, public companies, your recourse is going to, the Chancellery Court of Delaware and, and filing suits where you actually can get access to, capital, to cash. You can, sue. In this case, what you're saying for the ICOs, the recourse is I'm going to take my code and fork it, go home, and or I'm going to go into, public forums and try some kind of humiliation, but neither of those, get you financial, rewards.
Right, there's some amount of protection, right? Like the 2X was canceled because of that whole movement that happened. Like everyone got together and opposed the move to do a hard fork on Bitcoin, which was controlled by a small group of people. So it's already proven to be resilient and very conservative in its approach.
Chris, this is a live stream priority question. And you may have to dive deep into the data for this because you may not have it. But what survival rates of traditionally funded, what are the survival rates of traditionally funded startups after 3 years versus ICO funded companies by 2020?
So, at the beginning of a new technological cycle, early stage ventures, as you well know, are extremely skewed. So most of them don't make it, but the few that do are extremely successful sometimes. And here we're early stage, but also early stage on the technology. And when you compound the two, I would say that it makes even less likely that many of these will succeed.
I don't know who to give this to, but someone wants to pay their tuition with Bitcoin. What valuation? Well, 50,000 probably, no doubt. Kavita, what is the craziest idea that you've heard at Consensus? Because people try to recruit you, right? You're a powerful service provider and a development friend and a capital markets thing and an investor. So what is the craziest idea?
So many of them.
Oh, then go for the top three.
I can't name the company, but somebody came and they pitched for like a really good product actually, and kept on talking around it. And after like 30 minutes, I'm like, okay, I get it, but how are you using blockchain in it? And they just said, oh, we're just going to do tokens, so that's blockchain, and we'll just raise money. And I think that is where we get super scared. Like most of the ideas, they actually truly believe that just doing ERC20 tokens is what the usage of blockchain is to their product. And when you actually try to explain them, one of them actually told me that I should learn more about blockchain because I'm not realizing that is what blockchain is for. So.
I never get that. It's a pretty good question. Does decentralization, and the value of decentralization of the tokens means they're more kind of utility-based tokens and could be perceived as security tokens. So it's always a good thing to have a decentralized token model, but does it open vulnerability to money laundering? David and Chen, are these things you worry about daily?
Well, I mean, this is, law enforcement is very worried about the use of, of particularly Bitcoin for money laundering purposes. But, clearly there are those in the law enforcement community who see that, that this is not, completely anonymous. These are not completely anonymous transactions like cash, which is still one of the leading sources of money laundering. So there's a lot of tools out there that they can use. Unfortunately, our money laundering laws just have, quite frankly, not kept up.
It seems like there's just like complete theft. No one even has to worry about laundering anything.
I think there's this goes beyond theft. Obviously, there's some serious concerns about the use of Bitcoin for whether it's drugs or financing of terrorism or human trafficking, or there's a lot of bad stuff that can happen. But this is not new. This is not new to Bitcoin. That this has been going on for hundreds of years, and I think that with Bitcoin, with technology, we can actually use this to our advantage to try to find the bad guys or prevent the bad guys.
So I'm sure people are familiar with a firm called Cambridge Associates, who are advisors to family offices, universities, endowments, people with a lot of money. And they were asked this week, what should a family office or an endowment have in their asset allocation model for crypto? And their answer was, the answer is zero. You should have none of your assets, purely in the currency, but there's lots of ways to invest in people that enable the infrastructure. So my question to you all, and you can make this up if you want, but what is your goal with your own personal net worth in terms of percentage of assets in crypto that you'd like to aspire to? You may not have to be there, today, so to speak.
A third in real estate, a third in crypto, and a third in fiat.
What was that?
A third of your money in crypto.
A third.
A third in crypto, real estate, and fiat.
God love you, Chad. David? I'm sure you're not at a third.
No, if people were to ask me, I would probably not be advocating to put your money into crypto.
Pick a number. Pick a number.
I would have to go for closer to zero. I would say,
Is that zero?
In crypto, but to be thinking about those companies that are
enough.
in the space.
Fair enough. David?
So is the question, if I'm a wealth manager, what is the wise thing to do?
No, I'm your accountant.
You're my
I'm your
accountant.
I'm your accountant, and we're like, David, let's plan the future.
Gotcha.
What percentage of your assets do you want in crypto?
Well, I already have my entire life tied up in crypto, so I'm like... And I should probably have some fiat in case that wipes out.
Need another kind of wampum, huh?
Yeah.
Fair enough. Good for you. Kavita?
David just said before the panel that actually he doesn't have much. It's a potential of crypto which he's sitting on. I think it has been pretty much like 40 to 50% crypto.
Really? Okay.
25 to 30 in real estate, and then rest.
Chris?
Yeah.
So, like David, my research is in this space, so I'm heavily invested on that side. But I definitely don't think it's zero. And I would go back to, anything that you can lose to afford today, it's an extremely risky asset, and so it really depends on your appetite for risk.
Okay. I think we talk a lot about, what technologies are well-suited for ICOs. And I was, reading today, like on transactions per second, blockchain versus the Visa network. And it seems like there's like some places, some technologies, that blockchain and suing ICOs don't belong. Where does blockchain, not belong in terms of kind of this, technological advancement?
Real estate. I think that,
Like real estate, the asset or the capital, or? Because I think I was with you when we saw a real estate guy present his ICO.
So I know a lot of people are trying to put real estate on the blockchain, and the whole advantage of the blockchain is that I can transfer property or I can transfer digital property like a coin from one person to another, and there's no intermediary, no governance or anything. Real estate, it doesn't work so well. For example, if it doesn't matter what the blockchain decides. If the U.S. government decides that you don't own that piece of property, you don't own that piece of property. And so it's like you can't tether land rights to a digital ledger because ultimately it's people with guns who decide who owns what piece of property, and everybody else just sort of, you just hope that the system honors the deals that you've made.
Fair enough. Real estate. What else?
Yeah, I think anything that's physical commodity or physical assets. Real estate is one of them. Technically, if there was a way we could do it, if I stole his private key, I stole his house. But it's not possible. We still depend on laws and enforcement outside of the protocol. By that definition, real estate is one of them, and anything that's physical outside of the digital world, it's going to be tough.
I would say any setting where the last mile problem it's very severe. So when we think about a blockchain, it's exceptional at digital verification of attributes, but then often you have this interface with the real world, real events, real people, and unless you have a way to keep that in sync.
Is that because of the weight of the chain?
No, mostly because what you're getting is the verification of bits, and if those bits are not reliable, then Bitcoin, everything you need to know about Bitcoin is on Bitcoin.
So I just want to ask, get a little bit more. If your business is in, essentially identity and reputation, putting on the blockchain, why wouldn't we want to put physical assets on the blockchain? I mean, there is such friction right now in the whole real estate process. If you've closed on a mortgage in Massachusetts, you know how much and how costly this is. If we were to put this on the blockchain, we would put the title insurance business out. That would be hundreds and hundreds of dollars at every closing, when you buy your house. Oh, and by the way, they sell you the same policy. They make you buy the same policy every time you refinance. And so you have to buy a policy to protect the lender, and if you want to protect yourself, God forbid, you got to buy another policy. So why wouldn't we want to put that on the blockchain to just create this transparent record of every transaction? You could do, and whether it's birth certificates or marriage, anything like that.
I think I absolutely agree with you. I think the difference, and if whatever I'm getting is definitely insurance, titling, lot of any documents which require verification, identity, and a lot of middle layers which has to get out, 100% makes sense on blockchain. But maybe if I'm getting it right, Chet is talking about whether it's about having a physical asset collateralized on blockchain, is it?
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. You could do that, right? So if you link it to a trust, for example, then you suddenly have equity in real estate. I think the challenge is that the word that David was describing is one where you're building this without any sort of trusted intermediary. They'd play without some form of trusted intermediaries. But many of these applications will be on a continuum from fully decentralized to some sort of intermediary still adding value to the marketplace. And there you could definitely imagine, I think, a real estate play.
Yeah,
The
I think
trusted
that
intermediary has to be like the city or the municipality or someone who's today notarizing those records still have to be in the play. But if you remove them, that's impossible. So the whole idea of blockchain is disintermediation. Mm-hmm. So there is a little bit of conflict if you were to trying to stick to the original principles and try to do that. I would say just get a better database system and secure it. But sorry, David, you were going to say something.
Yeah, actually, I think anywhere, and I understand there are cities and countries which have a lot of dispute over the initial verification process, but I think that is where the technology is starting. In an year, 2 years, once you're going to have a lot of data on this technology and the sets are going to become, there's going to be a lot of arbitration process also, which is going to start happening on the verification of the process within blockchain. And so over next 1 year to 3 years, you're going to end up having that ecosystem where, irrespective of whether there is a government which has guns or not, you have a verified process and you can go and have a legal case around it on blockchain too.
Okay, we have a priority live stream question. This is like when Sean Spicer used to be, we have to break, the Fox station in Utah has a question. I know, it's kind of funny. David, I'm just going to read it, okay? Given that users of your platform must buy your utility token, and this implies currency conversion cost from US dollar, how can you compete with platforms that accept US dollars?
Well, storage on our platform is about 1/10 the price of our centralized competitors. So I think that the 1/4 to 0.5% that you pay to convert from USD to Sidecoin is not going to be super relevant. I also think, that aside, I also think that in 5 to 10 years, everybody, absolutely everybody is going to have a cache of cryptocurrency. Of some volume, it may not be massive.
Not David.
But it's just going to be practical. There are going to be things that you can get with cryptocurrency that you can't get without it. And because of that, every company in the world and every person in the world is going to have some volume of cryptocurrency so they can easily tap into these goods and services that exist only in the cryptocurrency world. And I think we're less than a decade away from like 99% adoption.
So your answer is because you're so cheap.
Yep.
Okay. Just so everyone knows, at 7:45, Kavita's going to go to the airport. She's flying to Berlin because...
5 minutes.
Oh, in 5 minutes. She's very anxious about travel times, as I discovered. So she has to go to catch a flight because obviously this whole phenomenon is global. And she's off to Europe. So here's well, we got one question. Is anyone here doing a blockchain ICO? Raise your hand if you're doing a blockchain ICO.
That's pretty good.
You must be doing what,
Awesome.
19, 20?
Wow.
right, well, that answers that.
I think I saw about 5 hands
said 5, yeah.
for the live stream.
Couple over there. Why wouldn't you? There was a question that I thought its context. I thought this context was very interesting because it says a lot about kind of what's going on. This question is, again from the live stream, when a project is accepted, how much does it cost? Do they take a cut? You know, there's a few things wrong with the concept of this question because there is no such thing as accepted. Like, you can go and do an ICO pretty much as soon as you could draft or get the contracts, which I'm pretty sure are probably available, you know, in open source. You got
75 lines of code or so?
75 lines of code. So there is no notion of acceptance. There is a notion to be accepted by top-tier service providers like a top-tier lawyer, top-tier accountant, top-tier, you know, capital market, dev shop, PR. There's a consortium of people that you probably want to be associated with, but there is no idea, there is just no notion of acceptance. And then it gets more interesting. How much does it cost? And what do you believe the cost is for quality? Well, I'm a accountant. I can tell you how much it costs. These things are damn expensive now to do it right. What was, you know, agree or disagree, you know, what was nominally maybe $200,000 to $300,000 a year ago, or $400,000 to $500,000, you know, a couple months ago, you're now in probably $600,000 to $700,000, you know, of cost to do a quality ICO. Agree? Disagree?
Agree.
Agree. Good. Do they take a cut? Come on. Yeah. You know, of course, it's America. They all take a cut. You know, this makes IPOs almost look, you know, dirt cheap in terms of, I don't want to say the pigs at the trough, but there's a lot of mouths to feed, you know, in order to do a quality, you know, ICO. And I think, you know, maybe, you know, David or Chet, you know, talk about, you know, how the economics work for an ICO. You know, you mine or create X amount of tokens, and then you know, how many does the company keep? Where do they go? How many do you keep in reserve? How many go into quote unquote strategic advisors? Or you know, just walk us through some of the economics of how that works.
So I think it's a lot of, you know, build your own burrito. Some ICOs will, you know, keep 95% of the coins for themselves, and some ICOs will sell 100% of the coins to the investors straight off the bat. Some ICOs will do tax structuring in a way where the U.S. is going to be taking like 30%, and by far your biggest fee is going to be Uncle Sam. Other ICOs will play games where they, you know, incorporate in the British Virgin Islands, and they have a founder who lives there like 9 months a year or something, and then they only pay like 5% tax. And then you know, law firms also take different fees and will give different levels of advice or quality of advice. And there's not been a lot of like there's not really a common way to do it right now. And so some ICOs just look like completely egregious, and they go and they raise $28 million. And like, how did something that bad raise so much money? But yeah, it seems very like random right now.
Maybe explain, you know, what it's like to raise, you know, ICO money. So, for example, if you're going public, you know, and I've been lucky enough to be a part of several of these. You know, you land in New York, you wake up at the Waldorf, the banker meets you at 7:15, you put on your best tie, your best suit, and they give you a list of the 23 meetings you're gonna have, and you're gonna go in 23 times, and you gotta utter a speech for 23 minutes. Your CFO's gonna speak before you do a couple Q&A, and you're getting the hell out of there, and they ask them if you want 10% of the book, and you're done. And you do that 22 times, you know, per day, per city, all over the world. That's different than raising ICO money, right? Where you go, to the basement of the Gunnery Tavern and try to read someone's name tag and say, hey, dude, are you a crypto investor? You know, want to read a white paper?
So my experience, we haven't done a high-profile ICO, so I can't speak from the winner's side of the fence. But having observed other companies, I actually think that most of the biggest, most successful ICOs did the, 1 month of going to every major city where ICOs are popular and doing a roadshow style thing and going to the right people and having meet and greets and whatnot. And so I do think that most of your high-profile ICOs do end up looking a lot like the process for high-profile IPOs.
Companies we work with, we also take them to Asia, Middle East, where it's some of the biggest markets. They do roadshows, they actually pitch, they do in a big meetups, they present what they're doing. And even before going ICO, they start looking into pre-ICO consolidation, and that gives them a very good idea about where is it gonna go.
And the timing is really funny, right? Because it kind of builds its own momentum and it has no natural stop. At least when you go public, you're off the road, the banker, either prices it or doesn't price it. These can just, meander, right?
Yeah, but I think, again, going back to what I was saying, this is what make an informative choice, and this what gets some of the really serious advisor on boards, which increases the confidence in the market by a lot of people who probably cannot themselves really do diligence on the documents. So this is the part and parcel of very similar to how you do raise private equity money nowadays.
How does someone do due diligence?
On a white paper?
Yeah.
I think
They hire another white paper author to
They do that.
do that, right? I mean, I would do that.
A lot of people do.
You're a crypto guy against my crypto guy. We'll figure out, who's telling the truth.
I think there's some additional dimensions too, right? So if you already think about the process of evaluating early stage startups is difficult. Here you also have the code base, the computer science side of things, and so you need new skills to evaluate that side. We tried to do this on the research front at scale, on almost 1,000 of these tokens. And it's hard because a lot of the signals that you would look for from the talent of the team to the code base are hard to read because the performance right now is kind of detached from.
Well, let's stay with that. So, obviously, if you get early momentum, that puts the power on the company side. Is that an indicator of the success of the ICO?
It's difficult to get good data on the momentum side of things. I mean, you can track some of the dynamics, but some of this close within seconds. So you don't have a lot of variation to begin with. Something that I think it's useful reference is when you look at how crowdfunding evolved from when Kickstarter started. I think you saw a lot of the same. It was kind of a market where entry barriers were really low. But now, if you want a successful Kickstarter, you have to do all these other things and arrange that.
Because Galen Moore was telling me yesterday, Token Report, and everyone should get it and see it. But he was telling me yesterday because we were talking about the consensus or some conference, and he was like, "Well, that guy, hasn't raised, his minimum yet, or he hasn't raised it, and you would never know, right? Because it all looks that. But that would be a really valuable thing to know, like how many SAFT agreements are they, in negotiation with, or whatever, right?
I think, ironically, for a space that's predicated on transparency, there's a lot more that can be done, right?
I saw a company who wanted to start to kind of automate this process. I was like, wow, that's a great idea, but maybe not for me. What about, let's talk about, it seems, applications that could really help society, so to speak, but maybe voting applications, nonprofit applications. Can you, are any of these like, helpful things that you could see, like the Gates Foundation being involved in, potentials in the ICO landscape?
Certainly, I think there are a lot of projects that are focusing on outreach for like some of the disadvantaged parts of the world. Where they don't have any kind of financial infrastructure. So there are projects like Lumen's Stellar project, as far as I remember, but no one, I don't see any of the foundations that have really taken on any of them except for Bitcoin. But I do believe that there are a number of different projects that can benefit from this technology. They don't have to ICO, so to speak. They just have to leverage what is already there.
But ICOs really are a way to capitalize a company.
You could use it to capitalize a foundation.
Foundation
So-
can,
And there's a lot of foundations involved in ICOs. A lot of the tokens are given to a foundation, or a foundation starts, right?
right.
I mean, I think that you'd be hard pressed to do an ICO for altruistic purposes because at the end of the day, everybody who puts money into an ICO is expecting a return. And if you don't have some sort of promise on how to get that return, you're not going to get the investment dollars. And so some of these more altruistic ideals, while I think the technology itself may be very useful, the ICO market's not going to be interested.
Now, what about the idea of,
But, I mean, if we're looking at this as a new way of, fundraising, I mean, who would have thought that you could have, these GoFundMe campaigns where people or causes that you weren't familiar with just kind of go viral and people are contributing money to. So, couldn't we, conceive of some type of ICO for altruistic purposes, for financial inclusion or some other means?
could have the nonprofit, it could be a new currency. It would be a new crypto, you'd have to have a new coin, right?
I mean, part of the promise around Title III equity crowdfunding was essentially social impact ventures, where you're not just investing because you want a return, your return could be impact
Right.
in society.
I think there are a few projects that I can't remember the names, but they're doing what they call as airdropping. So they raise money from one side to build the infrastructure while giving away free coins to people who are in these parts of the world. And they can benefit from the fact that there is a new economy being created as a result. We have to wait and watch how they're going to pan out. But there are some attempts, for sure. I see one of them here.
One thing I think about a lot, because there's this rush out there, and I think on one hand the argument is this is fast money for startups, and then the blockchain purists would say why be in a rush to do that? Why not raise a small amount of capital privately and ensure the product works? And that's certainly, David, what you did, right? You went underground, and Chet too, same thing. So what do you think of these people that, I don't want to categorize it as like raising sleazy venture money, but, what do you think about these people? It's like, well, I've got this, I got this idea, I have an existing business that's out there, say it's venture-backed, and I really see where putting it on the blockchain, has got great benefit to a lot of people, so I'm going to go spin that out, put my tech onto the blockchain, hire, someone like, Consensus to do, the core development and core tech stuff, and raise an ICO, around that.
There's no real utility for the blockchain. It doesn't make sense. Also, if the company is not working as a centralized entity, I don't know how it's going to work as a decentralized entity.
Well,
but that's just my opinion. But
okay, but in some cases, decentralized is better.
Yes, there are projects that could benefit from
right?
that. Yes.
So, I mean, is that dumb money? That goes in there.
Technically, it's an IPO. Yeah.
You think it is dumb money? It's okay, Chet,
I don't want
go
to say
ahead.
that. David.
Literally, it's actually, I kind of think, the dumb money is actually pretty smart, right? Because the hypothesis is that people have been sitting on the Bitcoin for a long time, seen an appreciation, and versus convert it out to dollars, why not place all these bets? That's a pretty smart investment thesis, no?
It's pretty risky.
All right, dumb money. Okay. I see how you purists work. I see how they work. Is there a framework which provides criteria for assessing business opportunities which best fit an ICO model?
So we tried in a research paper, which is on the economics of the blockchain, to lay out some ideas on that. And we identified two costs. One, which we call the cost of verification. So the idea that you can verify transaction attributes at a much cheaper rate than before. And the second one is what we call the cost of networking. So the idea that you can bootstrap an ecosystem, a digital ecosystem, and play the traditional network effects benefit in a different way. So some of those may sound a bit abstract, but I think the short version is, if the token allows you to reward people that can contribute to your ecosystem in a novel way, then I think there's potential for a token.
So, but is there a framework on there? Like, who figures that out? Is there like some economic thesis you can kind of, run, your token analysis through and then say, wow, this would really, this really, would be a valuable ICO?
I would say it's the same that you would run with an early stage startup trying to think through their business model.
Back to the Ouija board.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I get that. Well, here's a kind of contrarian question, and this is probably where real estate comes up. Does a company need to have blockchain-powered products in order to launch an ICO? Can I enter the horse race without a horse?
I don't see why. If you're a centralized company, you could just run a centralized token. World of Warcraft does it, and World of Warcraft currency has like substantial US dollar value. The market cap on it is, I don't know the exact number, but I know it's surprisingly big, probably tens to hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions. And so I don't think you need a blockchain to do a token offering.
And there are other crowdfunding platforms as well.
Right.
The Jobs Act has provided provision, Reg A+, doesn't have to be blockchain at all.
All right, David, this is for you. This just came out today. It's kind of interesting. A San Francisco court says Coinbase must provide the IRS with information on users who had more than $20,000 worth of annual trades on their account between 2013 and 2015. The exchange acknowledged that only 800 to 900 users had reported gains for the period, yet more than 14,000 users had bought, sold, or received coins worth at least 20,000. Net, 13,000 people didn't report their taxes.
And the question is?
like what is going to happen? I mean, is Coinbase going to be like one of these offshore accounts where the feds go in and kind of deal with Swiss private banks to get the user information? Is this going to get subpoenaed? Are people going to go to jail? How you have the most experience here of how regulators, in this case enforcers, think about this. That's a lot of tax dollars to collect.
So, in the interest of full disclosure, when you introduced me, you mentioned that in my past, up until the end of last year, I was a regulator, career regulator. Beginning of this year, I joined the board of directors of Cross River Bank. One of our biggest customers is Coinbase. We are one of the few banks in the country that openly embrace this space. One of our competitors is Silicon Valley Bank. Most banks won't touch it, but if you're a company that is willing to embrace a strong compliance framework, we're happy to talk to you. So I can't really, I don't really want to talk about Coinbase in particular, but I can say that, yeah, the IRS made it clear in terms of what they thought the status of Bitcoin trades were, and it's a taxable event, and if they think that there's money to be had, they're gonna do what it takes to obtain the information.
As they should, right? Do you think the government would ever issue cryptocurrencies?
Yes.
And some governments do, right?
Yeah, some are kind of tiptoeing into this space, but look, this is not going to happen overnight. You heard the New York Fed president Dudley, who indicated that he thinks that the U.S. should issue or should look into issuing its own cryptocurrency. And I think that it's probably inevitable. So you're going to have this this closed system. But this is going to take a while before we get there, and then you're going to have central banks around the world trying to figure out
Do you think, like in the next presidential debate, this will be a topic?
No, this will. I think that there are a few tweets between now and then that will be part of a presidential debate that will not include cryptocurrency.
Well, speaking of North Korea. What are your thoughts, everyone's thoughts on China, banning Bitcoin? We talk about, Kavita was saying, she's off to, Berlin, and I think, I don't know if Ash is still here. He's off to China next week and South Korea and wherever. But what's the headline of China, banning Bitcoin?
I think
I
that
don't think they banned Bitcoin, but continue. They banned,
they banned ICOs,
and
not
exchange.
Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And I think that China has been pretty consistent in their motivation. I think their goal is to protect their citizens and their country, and then probably even more importantly, to advance their status as a world power. I think that there are a lot of officials at China who recognize that blockchain is very big and potentially, as big as the internet and potentially world-changing. So I think China is trying to move strategically in a way that, both protects their citizens from, potential abuse, but then also will position them as a global authority in blockchain. And I think they're really eager to, have the position in blockchain a decade from now that the U.S. had at the beginning of the internet.
Do you sell your service in China?
Our service is decentralized. It's available everywhere.
And what percentage of your decentralized users, happen to live in China?
As it were, actually, the Great Firewall of China makes it pretty difficult to operate. So we see relatively low usage in China.
So with all these,
David is right that that China has been very consistent in terms of advancing the agenda to.
So you think they're doing it from strength and not fear?
Yeah. So they have the ability to ban this temporarily, and what you will see is that when they lift the ban, they will lift it in a way that advances the.
Well, the way I understand it is the ban just means everyone's just buying out of Hong Kong.
That's sort of what's happening, right? Because they're afraid of capital flight, and also censorship is a big part of the Chinese policy. Right. And their self-sovereign wealth is not a concept that they want to embrace at all. But the more they're going to attempt, the more it's going to be hard for them, because this is all going to go into the darker web. And people can still do those things.
I'm a natural optimist because what early stage investor isn't. But if we really are in a bubble that's about to blow, what would that look like? What would create the what's the doomsday scenario? Like, what's the thing you would be like the most worried about? Not that it will happen.
If I were to compare it to the dot-com bubble, to 99, I think what we know from statistically, there was like $1.7 trillion that went in IPOs. But that bubble is what created the internet. That bubble is what created all of the technologies that we use today.
Do you remember the 1999 bubble?
Sort of, yeah. I was
and was there like a seminal thing that like struck you, that like, oh my God? Was it like the pet van thing? Was it, Nortel being valued at $500 billion? Or, what was it that you're like, damn, that was just so obvious? And how would that relate now?
Pets.com was a good example.
Pets.com.
Yeah, because it was also infrastructure wasn't ready back then. So most of the projects today that people should be looking at are on the infrastructure layer.
So
like
do you believe the
storage.
blockchain infrastructure is there now?
No,
Is that a perhaps a contributing factor to a potential doomsday scenario?
Doomsday.
Well, bubble, I don't know, whatever you call it when your bubble breaks up. I remember it was a doomsday.
I think that as a seasoned Bitcoiner, we've seen red before. It wouldn't be the first time that your token had lost 90% of its value, and then if you wait 3 years, it'll probably gain it all back, and then another 10x. So from my perspective, the idea of Bitcoin going back down to 500, I remember when it was amazing that it was 500. I paid all my college debt by selling Bitcoins at $600. So that's not really a scary place for me.
To me, back in the 90s, I was running company traveling around the world, and I remember, I was flying out of Logan, and I was at the ATM, and one of the guys with an American Airlines jumpsuit, one of the, guys that works on the ground, walks up and he says to his buddy, "Oh man, I hear Cisco is so hot." And I'm like, "Oh my God, just time totally get out of Dodge." Maybe that's where we're at with the 10,000, these mental barriers.
On a more positive note, I mean, it's going to be painful for the people that are vested in the bubble. But after those things over history have always brought major waves of technological innovation. So it's almost like we have to go through the pain of that bubble eventually, so that we get the companies we know today.
So is this a good time or bad time to be a Wall Street banker on the tech side? If you're on the M&A tech side over at Goldman or J.P. Morgan, what are they saying in their planning meetings for 2018?
More people will be listening to you than before, I think. So at the very least, you have an opportunity, and then it's up to you to screw it up or not.
And do you think that there'll be a wave of ICO mergers?
Probably.
That'd be right.
I can't imagine how that's going to work, because you got two tokens.
Well,
two
David, just
different
between you and me, and you're in a hot space and you've got a great business model, is your phone ever rung with a strategic idea? Someone wants to buy you, merge with you, partner with you?
We've looked at merging a couple of times. The other people were not excited about it. And again, we have
that's
no
because
idea.
you were selling, not merging.
Yeah, kind of. So, not selling. We were looking to acquire them, and they didn't like our terms.
Oh, I see. What do you think, Chris? Be a way, and if there is a wave of mergers, how are these valuations gonna look like? How would a banker who lives on these trading ranges and your value versus my value and blah blah blah, what comps are people gonna look at, and how will these mergers be valued?
I mean, it's going to be extremely challenging, because not only you need finance and economics expertise, but also some CS expertise. The three fields are, I think, all three relevant, and so I don't think I have a good answer for you yet.
No good answer? Okay. Oh, sure. Oh, it's a priority. All the green ones are priority. They're coming from my wife. This is a great question. Do sanctions by world powers lose leverage because of crypto? How many North Koreans are mining Bitcoin right now?
Do they even have electricity?
They are. It's below the belt. They are.
Is the question particular? You're not asking about North Korea. You're talking about in general.
You're talking about sanctions.
Does the government sort of lose the ability to take action because of this decentralized?
Well, do sanctions lose their effectiveness? Because a rogue, the evil countries, will resort to, bad crypto behavior and not care about, like, I don't know, shipping lanes, so much, or bank accounts so much, or...
I don't know. I think it really does depend on your view of the effectiveness of sanctions in general. Many would argue that it has not been effective in many years, in many spaces with different countries. I don't think that it changes just because we're talking about crypto. So if you believe that sanctions work, then you probably don't care about crypto. If you don't think that they work, that you're convinced that they only become less effective.
So in the new ICOs, who protects the shareholder? The original shareholders. David, you said you have shareholders and all that. And generally speaking, of course, in the Chancellery Court of Delaware would say that it's the role of a director to protect every class of shareholder, or every shareholder regardless of class. But in today's new world order, these ICO, who protects the shareholder? I mean, many of these SAFs are like deals on future sales. So you want the company to go fast to get those sales out there. Where does the shareholder sit in this?
Tokens are not shares. So tokens are not shares. So the shareholder
No, I understand that. But you start your company around the table. You raise money from your friends and family, and then you decide to do an ICO, and the ICO becomes like so much bigger than anything you've done before that the people who capitalize your company get you to a point. Who's protecting them? This is how early stage companies work, right? First thing you do is tap out your Visa card. Second thing you do is hit up your parents and your friends, and who's around to protect the shareholders?
Right now, not much.
Nobody, I think.
Nobody. All right, we're okay with that.
One potential argument to that is these markets are a lot more liquid. So if shareholders don't like the direction things are going, they can sell faster. Now, if the founders go to the Cayman Islands and buy a bunch of boats, I don't know what you do about that.
So that argument, by the way, I encourage everyone to read this, was put forth just this week by a post by Jamie Goldstein over at Pillar.vc, who said, and they're a venture firm. He said, we buy equity, and we're used to buying equity and all this, and we're okay buying tokens. And for us, we can pull out because we have liquidity, and that is the argument for protection. It isn't the argument for governance, right? It isn't the argument for the company will do the right thing and all that, but it is the argument. It is the argument for investing.
Previous point on governance, right? We have exit, but we also need some form of voice, and so that has to develop in this ecosystem.
Is it too late to buy Bitcoin?
Well, so my general advice is you should never buy an asset that has recently gone up a ton in value. But maybe in like 3 or 4 months, you haven't missed out.
But like in 2 to 3 years, what do you think the price is?
$1 million.
$1 million. So what do you care about 2 months?
I mean, there's going to be some correction, but I would expect it to go up to $50,000 in the next 3 to 5 years, at least 25K, if nothing, even if you look at it from a gold market cap standpoint.
I think $1 million's inbound.
Wait till you have the fixed income crypto funds. Okay, we have just like 5 minutes left, and I have, first I want to thank you all because you've really been great, and I want to thank the audience, especially the ones who wrote neatly. I mean, is it a neat one?
It looks pretty neat.
Oh, this is a good question. Will the monetization of Bitcoin network lead to new currencies taking rise? Naturally, right? Do you see Bitcoin, this will be our last question, and let you all have time for closing remarks. Do you see Bitcoin mining as a big disadvantage in terms of energy consumption Do you expect big innovations here?
So I'm going to field this one. So I believe that if you think that proof of work is a waste of energy, you miss the piece that ties it all together, which is the waste is what makes decentralized currency possible. And so if you start to find secondary uses for that, let's do storage at the same time, suddenly you have this, you can no longer, so with Bitcoin, I can prove to you that I destroyed $100,000 and that this history is relevant to you because I provably destroyed $100,000 worth of electricity. But if I could have also, say, stored someone's files and then got paid for storing those files, you don't know that I actually had any true investment in this one chain. And so what really ties everything together is the fact that you are destroying things, and that provides a cryptographic digital proof that you can't get in any other way. And so people who are looking to eliminate proof of work, I think that proof of work is the most beautiful way that I've ever seen to get a bunch of people who don't trust each other at all and don't know each other and expect to be stabbed in the back to agree that a certain set of transactions is the correct history or the correct set of transactions and agree on who has what money.
Can we say creative destruction? And it's definitely lesser than the fees that we pay all the banks. So if you quantify that way.
I think it's important to consider that different economic problems will require different solutions. So I think David is absolutely right. The game theory is correct, right? In an environment where you don't trust anybody, that's what you want. And maybe that's one of the solutions. But many economic and valuable networks don't need to be completely trustless. And so I think you'll see many different solutions evolve over the next years. And a lot of computer scientists are coming in with novel ideas. So I think you'll see more than just proof of work.
And I think a great example of that would be the modern banking system. A lot of modern banks are looking at doing private blockchains where they don't need proof of work because they all have trusting relationships with each other and they have recourse if something goes wrong. And so it's not this private, or it's not this trustless arena. Banks can take these shortcuts that allow them to get away from proof of work because they know each other and they have relationships and recourse. And so they can get rid of the expensive proof of work component, but still get all the ledger pieces.
When do you think banks will start offering wallets?
What was that again?
When do you think banks will start offering wallets?
Too late?
When do you think Bank of America, stop giving out toasters and start giving out, wallets?
Not in the next year, but I'd say in the next 5.
All right, David, any concluding thoughts?
So, 2, just to get back to what I said at the beginning, that as much as the purists might hate it, that regulation will help make this maturing market. So if you want to get involved, you should, because we've got a situation where you've got this round peg and a square hole, or square hole, square peg, round hole, whatever you want to call it. But our rules today just don't fit with with what has evolved. But second, getting back to your question about what is the future like? Are we at a bubble? It's almost irrelevant. There is this euphoria. It's likely we're going to see something. I told you so. Upward prices, a year from now, because there will be, some incredible advances and opportunities, because this is not going away.
Forward, never straight.
Yep.
Got it. Chad?
I would say moratorium on the regulations. Market will self-correct, and it's the same way as the internet. The government gave a lot of time for it to develop and did introduce some regulations eventually.
Now look where we're at.
Now they're going all over and trying to take away even our fundamental right to access internet, net neutrality. I'm sure all of us here are against it. So I would say moratorium on regulations is definitely necessary for this technology and this whole ecosystem to develop, and for all of our minds to sort of shift to what it is and what this whole philosophy is.
David?
I would say that blockchain technology and Bitcoin, I think Bitcoin is the most underrated cryptocurrency. Underrated and underpriced out of all of them on the leaderboard. But, and I would also say that I think it's extremely early. It's both super fascinating, and I think the majority of even crypto enthusiasts don't really understand what makes it so amazing. And I think that it's not too early to get involved. And if you join, the early set of people who truly get it, even if you don't invest in the token or speculate or put yourself at any sort of financial risk, you still set yourself up to be, one of the leaders tomorrow. Because I'm almost certain that there will be a huge dearth of leadership and knowledge as blockchain continues to grow.
Chris, thank you.
Kind of building on David's point, I would say if you're curious about the technology, try to spend time learning it. I think it enables a number of new types of business models and ways to bring together digital platforms and ecosystems that were impossible before. That doesn't mean that it fits every problem. And so also thinking hard about what is the last mile problem, that interface between offline events, offline people, offline organizations, and the online decentralized ledger. And now you can help with that, because I think when you start solving some of those problems, then you can create a lot of impact in society.
Awesome, thank you. So I've been thinking about morphing my business model since y'all told me I don't have a job. So I think I'll go into like textiles and marine autonomy and things that can't go on the blockchain so quick. So there we have it, 7:59, 1 minute early. Thank you all so very much. That was great. And to you people, thank you so much. Look at all that. And I could read like 3 of them.